Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, the review embargo is up and I can now officially talk in full detail about my early experience playing the new Vessel of Hatred expansion, as well as Season 6 for Diablo 4. For context, we had access to the server for a bit over a week. It was disconnected from our main account, so we didn't have anything carry over like Renown or something like that, meaning that we had the full, fresh start experience for the expansion. We could skip the base campaign, of course. That said, I dove face first into every activity on offer, new or old, experienced a ton, and so in the coming days, we'll have a ton of different videos about different mechanics and especially things like the Spiritborn class itself. But today, to start with something somewhat simple but important, a general review of everything new. First up, we should start with the new campaign in Vessel of Hatred. I won't be spoiling anything, no cutscenes that aren't publicly released, no deep in gameplay or anything like that, and so without going into too much detail, the campaign is honestly fantastic. It's super high tier, exactly the type of thing that I would expect from a Diablo storyline at this stage, as they do constantly hit with these very well, especially in the main releases. It carries off from where the base game ended, and it ties off a lot of the loose ends that were around, as well as starting some new threads, of course. It feels like it truly takes you through Nahantu as the new region, and it tries to have you connect with the world around you in this area too, as you continue through the game. As a cool side note here as well, a number of conversations and interactions are actually unique if you are playing Spiritborn, as of course, there are Spiritborn characters in the main story, and they obviously know what a Spiritborn is, so if you're playing a Spiritborn, your home is Nahantu, and that changes some of the context, rather than being a visitor like the other classes are treated. And so, things are a little bit different, and I love that they thought about that and included alternate dialogue where applicable. The cutscenes are all incredible, honestly. There is a lot of just absolutely beautiful visual spectacles along the way through these, and importantly, I never felt like my time was being wasted in the campaign. It was relatively snappy, one thing to another, always one story thread to the next, never really lingering too long on any one note. If I had one major criticism of the story, it would be something that we probably all expected, which is that it is very clearly caring a lot about setting up the next expansion story and creating hype for a continued storyline from this through to next year. And while that sort of does need to happen if they want another expansion to make sense and if they want people to be hyped for it, it does leave you with a bit of a feeling like your job isn't finished when the campaign wraps up here, at least in my opinion. Next up then, the absolutely major thing is the new full-on class, and I had the joy of spending about 90% of my time in this review build playing Spiritborn. I played it a few months ago at an early event down at Blizzard HQ, and while the bones of the class are the same, the ideas are still there, it feels just so significantly more refined and polished than it did before. At the event, it was really easy to break the class. There were tons of things that you could do that just made it absolutely busted even at level 30, and while there are still ways to quote-unquote break the class, they are much more reined in, targeted, and generally they are something that you have to work towards rather than just putting on the right combination of skill tree nodes and, becoming an instant god. The overarching mechanic then of Spiritborn is called the Spirit Hall, and while I'll get into way more detail into all of the Spiritborn specific stuff in extra videos on Spiritborn in the coming days, the Spirit Hall essentially gives you a choice between 16 different possible combinations of ways to change your playstyle. Some of these have a much more major effect than others, some are much more minor, and currently they are pretty imbalanced between each other, to be honest, with a few really standing out, others being much more quality of life or utility, but some of them just stand above the others. We'll talk about what's specifically powerful and not in the Spiritborn specific videos that I mentioned before, but for now let's just talk about what it does and how it feels. Generally speaking, the important things to know for now are that the Jaguar Spirit Hall options generally boost your attack speed or give you ferocity, which also affects attack speed, and it gives bonuses based around this. Eagle Spirit Hall boosts evades and gives you a sub-power that works with evades, and the secondary Eagle Spirit Hall gives you growing crit chance when you move that resets when you crit. Gorilla Spirit Hall messes with damage reduction and resolve. It gives you barrier on hit, and the resolve is a new specific Spiritborn mechanic that reduces your incoming damage but loses a stack when you get hit. Gorilla Spirit Hall also gives you an active Thorns based playstyle, making it so every hit that you do also applies your Thorns damage to enemies that you hit, and making funky new ways of scaling around Thorns as a result that I really love conceptually. Then Centipede is all about debuffing your enemies, lowering their damage, slowing them, and healing you as you apply poisons as well. So really just two sides of the same coin, life and death and the balance between them. The primary Hall choice also importantly adds its Guardian skill tag to every skill on the tree, meaning if you have primary Spirit Hall choice as Gorilla and then you cast an Eagle skill, it counts as both an Eagle skill and a Gorilla skill. This adds just by itself so much depth to the way that the builds are created for the class, and Spiritborn is easily actually the deepest build creating class in the game. game. There is a ton of potential variety within it, and while most of the high-end builds will likely have a large focus either around armor stacking with the legendary aspect that converts armor into bonus weapon damage, or mystic circles, which are a lucky hit chance subpower to create with certain aspects that apply a bunch of different bonuses depending on what skills you cast within them. These will be base templates of how to make things strong in general, but these apply so widely to so many just different parts of the class that you could build around that you can actually make the majority of Spiritborn's kit extremely strong if you choose to focus on it and base the actual power center around one of those two things. A lot of the class is viable in different ways, and while of course there will be a couple of things that stand out at the precipice as normal, a class with this much potential high-end variety is just really nice to see. On a Spiritborn specific note as well, the Spiritborn class mechanic unlock quest is really quite special compared to the others. It definitely feels longer than the other mechanic unlock quests for the other classes, so the people who care about hyper efficiency probably won't like that, but it is a fun quest, and not that I want to spoil it at all, so I'll just say that it takes you to the spirit realm, and it asks you to do a fair bit more than just killing things. There's some cinematicness and some spectacle involved in all of it that just makes it feel really unique. As for higher levels, I've tried mixing and matching guardians and abilities in tons of different ways, and the main takeaway that I have is that the class just feels really good to play. Pretty much everything that sparked my interest and made me think that it might be worth trying worked. It was worth trying. No matter which guardians I messed with as my focus, no matter which abilities I built around, the class felt good. Of course, the numbers were different between these. Some of them are stronger than others, but numbers can be adjusted. Numbers can be changed. What matters is that the things feel good to play in your hands. And as someone who has actively played every class in this game at one point or another since launch, Spiritborn feels absolutely incredible. I'd say, generally speaking, the best feeling class overall to me until this point has been Rogue. It just has a lot of parity between its abilities, a lot of speed, interesting synergies, and a lot of high-end builds that are relatively balanced between each other. It feels extremely good to play from the start of leveling all the way to hyper endgame builds, and Spiritborn feels extremely similar to that in that way, to me at least. If the class looks interesting to you at all from any of the stuff you've seen before release, I'd say you should probably try it this season. It's just plain fun, and it's worth the time. Moving on now, I know I talked about the class a lot, but it is probably the biggest addition really to the game here from this, but there's a lot of other stuff going on here too. Nahantu itself is a really neat new region addition to the game. The dungeons and strongholds within the region are very unique compared to the other regions too. The strongholds are much more in-depth and interesting, but also quite a bit longer than the other region's strongholds in general, so they're quite good for a first-time visit, but not necessarily great for efficiency blasting once you've already been there. The dungeons are also quite similar. Nahantu dungeons are designed in a totally different way to the rest of the dungeons in the game. Rather than being a big sprawling dungeon with a million different objectives that you have to complete before you finish it, and it forces you to backtrack like 10 times like we had in the base game release, or the currently updated versions of those dungeons, which are much more linear in their pathing and simple in their objectives to let players just burn through high density corridors of monsters without backtracking. Instead of either of these, Nahantu dungeons try to find a sort of weird middle ground. The main objective is nearly always just get to the boss and then kill the boss, simple as that. But then the dungeon itself is usually quite big. There's usually a number of optional areas and unique sort of side events like animus dropping enemies that you could find in normal dungeons in the base game, but here they're optional and you can collect all their anima to hand it in for a bonus chest. All of this creates a lot more optional content in dungeons, a lot more things that you can do but don't have to, and that's a good thing in itself. But my main criticism for these is that it feels really bad to have Fog of War on the dungeon map with how these dungeons work. I get the idea behind making the only forced objective the boss and then giving optional stuff that you could do, but it seems sort of like a moot point if I don't know where the boss is without having to explore the whole place anyways and then backtracking 3 times regardless. This feels like a very interesting evolution from what dungeons have been in the game in the past, and I think with some work they will be really enjoyable. But again, my major concern with these is just the Fog of War makes it confusing because it feels like they want to give you the option to go right to the end immediately, but if you don't know where the end is, you just can't do that. As for the main new activities in the expansion itself, there's Kurast Undercity. This unlocks during the story, but you don't really have full access to what it offers until you finish its dedicated questline as well and unlock tributes. Tributes allow you to modify an Undercity run, which makes it harder than normal for your difficulty tier, while also giving you extra rewards at the end. Worth mentioning here that on the review build, 3 of these weren't actually functioning properly, so my information on how they actually work is a bit limited to what we are told should happen. But this activity with the tribute that makes it drop runes is supposed to be the main source of rune farm in the game once it hit live. The rewards from this feel genuinely good at the moment. The boss summon tribute especially absolutely works. That's the one that definitely worked for us, and you get quite a pile of them at the end of your run. It feels like a rewarding activity that is worth doing, and the pace of it in the middle is actually just super go, go, go from the start to the finish, and that feels pretty unique too. It's sort of like Hordes without the breaks in the middle and in a much smaller sort of burst. The main draw of these, in my opinion, is that there are 3 different sort of versions of the Undercity, each with a different aesthetic and a different boss at the end of the actual run, a unique boss. And to put it simply, these are some of the best designed bosses in the entire game. They are mechanically interesting, they are visually fun and unique, and they have their own personally designed boss rooms that actually generally have an effect on the fight as well, and are sometimes even included. I am a massive fan of these bosses, and I hope they do more fights like this in the future. Then after that, we have the new super endgame mechanic, the activity, the Dark Citadel. This requires at least 2 players to complete, and we of course did it with the 3 of us who play here on the channel, and it was pretty solid overall. The general flow of it is a floor of just regular enemies where your only goals are to find specific marked targets that you need to kill to increase your end reward. You don't actually have to kill them to finish the event, but you need it if you want full rewards. Or you can just find the door to the next chamber. The areas are big and full of enemies that don't really give you anything in particular, so it adds to the atmosphere of the place, but I think after the first time you head through the Dark Citadel, most people will just fully ignore most of the enemies in these areas between, because they don't stop you from progressing, they don't really give you anything either, so they sort of just feel like they are intermissions between the actual interesting parts of the Dark Citadel. I won't tell you what every boss is going to be like, or the puzzles, or every encounter, but I will show you just a little bit, and the reason is because this actually has really interesting boss mechanics to it. The very basest use of the multiplayer requirement for this is the button pads that require 2 buttons to be pressed at the same time, and obviously you can't stand on 2 buttons as one person. But this extends outwards past that to things like space management mechanics in boss fights like an actual raid, a fight with a teleportation mechanic where you need to split up rather than all going to the same place together, a fight where you get symbols above each player's head that sort of dictate where you have to go and what you have to do. I just finished giving praise to the Undercity bosses for being some of the most interesting in the whole game that we've had so far, but the reason that I worded it that way specifically is because the 3 main Dark Citadel wing ending bosses are just straight up the 3 most mechanically interesting bosses in the whole game, in my opinion. And the actual rewards that you get at the end are pretty solid too. The rewards per run are quite meh in their own. You won't be wanting to run Dark Citadel on a repeat really, but you do get a very hefty reward cache for completing all 3 wings each week. The weak point of this activity, if I had to give it one, is by far the sections between the bosses and the puzzles, but I can absolutely accept that then when the bosses and puzzles are enjoyable, and they are, that the parts between them can be a bit less. So overall, just very positive impressions from this activity as well, and it could definitely be made even better in the future, or just more of these sort of systems added on, more activities, more wings, just another Dark Citadel, essentially. Then next up, we should talk about the mercenary system. The mercenary system is something that I was worried beforehand would be very sort of invasive to the Diablo experience. I was worried that we'd have to play around them in some way, or that they would be just taking up a large amount of my screen, or yelling at me constantly. And to put it simply, they just sort of do their job and follow you around relatively quietly. They do talk sometimes. There isn't a massive amount of depth to them as a system, but there is enough that it is impactful. They do have skill trees, and they can affect you with their abilities. Most players will default to a couple of choices of mercenaries if they care about sheer power and efficiency, but each mercenary has their own personality and their own story and unlock quest, with which are all quite fun to engage. Mechanically, they are reduced to a follower, essentially, with 4 abilities, a basic skill, a core skill with a cooldown, a longer cooldown, stronger skill, and their inherent ability, which sometimes is passive, sometimes it's active. They all have their own passives as well, and you can also have a reinforcement chosen, which is essentially the ability to have one skill from a mercenary just come out whenever you feel like it should, though it doesn't take in any of the passive effects from that skill tree itself. The end result of the mercenary system is essentially like the Seneschal companion from Season 3, but if it had maybe 1/10 of the impact that that did. It matters for sure, but it definitely isn't build defining. And a fun part of this is that they seem to matter much more while leveling than they do while you're maxed out, which is exactly what I would hope for this too. I would hope that it makes it easier to level, but doesn't actually require you to be completely on top of it when you're doing a proper blasting build. Then the last sort of Vessel of Hatred specific thing that I want to talk about here is the runes and Runewords. We were pretty limited on our actual supply on these on the review build due to a few issues with drops from certain activities, but the main results is that they are just far less impactful than what they were on the PTR. You saw the patch notes come out after the recent dev stream. The Warcry rune no longer gives berserking, the Petrify rune no longer gives the crit damage bonus, and they did a lot of things like this across the board. There still are good good and bad runes, but the good ones are less ridiculously good, and the bad ones are less ridiculously bad. Like mercenaries, they definitely do matter, just far less than we were worried that they would, especially after the PTR. Before I move on to the non-expansion stuff, then, I do want to make a quick note that both the story campaign and Dark Citadel actually also give you access to a number of new, unique cosmetics for your wardrobe in-game that are pretty solid looking compared to a lot of the base game armor and weapons too, because I know a lot of people always wonder about stuff like that specifically. That said, I now want to talk about the Season 6 mechanic itself, which is Realmwalkers and the Seething Opals. The Realmwalker activity is great when it's up. Every 15 minutes, a timer starts in a random region. After 5 minutes, the Realmwalker will spawn in. If you miss the spawn time though, you are locked out until the next one comes. After the Realmwalker spawns, it will be invincible and create the minions. Kill the minions that it spawns to fill a bar that spawns some new elites. Kill the elites to do some free damage to the Realmwalker while it is otherwise invincible. That said, that's all pretty much just a bonus. If you just wait for the Realmwalker to walk to its end location, the only difference will be that it will have some more health for the proper fight. Once it arrives, it will create 3 pillars that you then have to destroy, and once you do that, it will become fightable as a proper boss. Defeat it, and then you can enter the portal that's on its back, and inside you get to choose what type of opal you want at the end of the mini dungeon that follows, which is a unique consumable. The activity itself is honestly quite fun. It's engaging. The mini dungeons inside of the Realmwalkers feel pretty rewarding too, especially when you find things like portal goblins or mini events that give loads of murmuring opals. There's lots of good stuff inside here that makes it a very enjoyable activity. My main criticism here is that it should just be up more often. They sort of function like Legion events where if you go early to one, you just sort of have to sit there and wait, but if you go late, you will miss it entirely until the next one and you gotta wait for it to cycle again. While I can understand why they would do this to manage the actual activity and keep it from getting out of hand, it just feels a little bit awkward because I really did just have a point where I wanted to sort of run Realmwalkers one after the other, and if you want to do that, there's just a lot of waiting involved in intermissions in between that you just have no control over. As for the opals themselves, they feel pretty great. When I'm low on materials, I pop a material opal and then I go kill stuff. If you want boss summon materials, pop a boss summon opal and then go kill stuff. There were a number of bugs with the opals on the review build that I've been told will be fixed going to live servers, and if so, I have genuinely no negatives for this system. It's just a really fun addition and a good idea for a thing that will only stick around for one season at a time. Past that, the other main thing that I really want to talk about, because most things are quite similar to the PTR, is the way that the difficulty has changed, because I don't necessarily think that it's good or bad, but I want people to know what they're getting into. Torment 4 difficulty, the highest world tier in the game come the expansion, has been made harder than it was on the PTR, and for the most part, most classes will only have 1 or 2 builds that will be able to function normally in Torment 4. Do not expect for your random fun meme build to make it to Torment 4. I'm not saying there's a problem with running a random fun meme build, those are great, but just don't expect it to be able to make it to that final level of content, simple as that. Pretty much everything else though, at this point, has either been talked about or will have a dedicated video coming up for it soon, but my main overarching feeling about this update and this expansion as a whole is that it's just honestly a really solid addition to the game. A large number of the best bosses that are in the game now are only here because of this expansion. The 2 new major activities are both great and will absolutely be a welcome addition once players get their hands on them. The new class is extremely well made with tons of options and it feels really good to play. The campaign is lovely, the music is fantastic too, the music is great, and the seasonal mechanic itself is pretty solid too. There are bugs, there are issues, I would absolutely not call it perfect, there's things that need to be changed, but it follows the same upward trajectory that Diablo has been on for the last couple of seasons, and just a much larger jump. It continues to improve, and everything they add is good, even if it could be slightly better. And that is what matters most to me. Everything that's added is good. Even things that are jarring at first, like the maximum level change, the stat squish, the paragon changes, the changed skill trees, all of it just actually feels like it works long term. It didn't feel weird once I'd played with it for a bit, and it started to feel a bit more natural. I still would like one more paragon board, maybe, but that's just sort of a disagreement of where I think the limit should be, because I do agree with them that there should probably be a limit to begin with. Overall, I just had a great time with the review build of the expansion, and as long as you know what you're getting into, I think it's worth it if you're considering it. If you played Season 5 and you didn't like it, then this probably won't be enough to change your mind. If you quit back in like Season 3 and haven't played since then, a lot has changed in this time, and you may very well enjoy this expansion now. If you are someone who enjoyed either Season 4 or Season 5, played the game, had fun, this one improves even further than those things did, and there is just a lot of worthy additions to the game coming along with it. This just about does it for everything today then. All of my feelings on the expansion and the season summed up relatively briefly. Let me know your own thoughts in the comments down below, and if you have any questions that we can answer, we will do so too. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweets. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.